It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. It's the Take Command podcast. Craig Hoffman here. Logan Paulsen there. And we've gone through the tape. It's a Tape Tuesday. Logan, I'm excited to talk about it. Plenty to talk about on the tape. We'll get to the defense, which obviously a lot of people have questions on, including, I think, us. A lot of people have questions on later on in the show, but we're going to start with the offense, and we're going to dive right in with what is, I think, starting to become a kind of cohesive offense with an identity. There's obviously a lot of room to grow, but what did you make of the game that Cliff called, how they deployed their weapons, kind of the big picture offensive stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think I really liked what Cliff did. I think they started off a little bit conservative in terms of play call. You know, they were very kind of RPO heavy. I think you see that with all the screens they threw early on. Those are ones that Jayden can hit. They're not true RPOs. They're more like counts. You know what I'm saying? Like if you like the count over the screen or you like the spacing over the screen, go ahead and throw it. And obviously some of those are reads, but I'd say a huge percentage of those early plays were just RPOs, trying to get him in a rhythm. And I appreciated that. I think the other thing that I was surprised at going back and rewatching the film is how many second and long and third and long plays they were in. Usually when you're running the play volume between the 20s that those guys are running, you think that they're going to be crazy efficient on first down, but they weren't really. And so I thought that they did a good job overcoming. We went to training camp over summer and we watched them do like a lot of second and long work, which I thought was great. And they did a really good job managing those situations. And then as the game went on, I think we were talking about, you asked me a question, I forget exactly the wording, but it was like, did you feel Jayden kind of opened up in the second half? And I really feel like yes, but also I feel like there was a play, I forget the exact number, where like Zach's running this sail route, he kind of escapes to his right and delivers the football down the field, and it kind of bred some confidence in him. And early on, like I think Cliff, again, like I said, was being conservative with the call, which I think was appropriate, but I think it took like a call that was a little bit more dynamic and Jayden pushing the football down the field to kind of open them up. So I think there was a lot of good things. I think there was a really cool formula to kind of see, and I thought it changed quite a bit from week one, just in terms of kind of some of the stuff they were getting to, which I thought was really good. And so overall, I thought the offense, outside of the red zone, obviously, did a pretty good job, of just being innovative, using formation. Like there's a bunch of plays where I was really impressed, even in the run game where Cliff used formation, and not necessarily motion, but formation to maximize stuff. And a lot of cool stuff like that. So I was very pleased with the offense. Obviously, they got to score touchdowns instead of field goals, but I think there's a lot of good things to take away from that performance for them.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, at the end of the day, this offense through 2 games has had 15 drives. They have ended in a field goal attempt or a touchdown on 12 of them. Now,
right.
K. York obviously missed a couple. Austin Seibert didn't. And there's way too many field goal attempts in there. And we'll talk about the red zone stuff here in a few minutes. But at the end of the day, like that's an offense that's figuring out how to problem solve. That's an offense that's doing a lot of really good stuff. And there are more problems to solve, but I look at those as growth opportunities. But there's some stuff that I just really like in terms of detail, Logan, that I think is like prevents the offense from shooting itself in the foot in ways that I've seen other offenses do in the past. A couple of examples just of details, or even like it just gets you an extra 3 yards by design. Like you win with the pen an extra 3 yards of, I don't know on some of these plays, whether it's a true play action, whether it's an RPO, whether it's a bubble and they're just carrying out the run fake. I guess that would be the play action, but like on the inverse of that, like, hey, we're going to carry out a fake of the bubble on a run play, but it was run all the way. And I think a lot of those are those box count plays that you're talking about. But because they all look the same, the players defensively have to respect them. So like if you have a problem with a corner coming and filling a run, let's just get rid of him by having a bubble action on the backside of a play or on the play side of a play. Now he's an extra step out of the hole. That's an extra 2-3 yards by nature. The linebackers can't crash as quickly to the run because there's a threat of the bubble. Like those kinds of things. On their screens, one thing that I've loved is the rat killers on screens. Like they always have someone blocking backwards to make sure the screen doesn't get caught from behind. You can tell that it's purposeful because like there's one where Andrew Wiley never even looks to block forward. Like he peels off and is looking backwards and picks off Kayvon Thibodeau. And you're like, great. Kayvon Thibodeau's not making the tackle and tripping up a dude from behind. And so those little things might only get you an extra 3-4 yards because it's taking one player out or making a player a half step later to a play that he ultimately makes. But we talk about getting out of 2nd and long, like the difference between 2nd and 9 or 3rd and 9 and 3rd and 6 is huge. And so I just really appreciate, and we can talk about the run game, and you could probably do an hour on the run game alone and the detail in there. But the detail level in this offense, especially considering last year we were preached, attention to detail, and then it was sloppy all year. The simplicity and detail of this offense is really fun to watch. It's clearly well thought out. And while they will continue to figure out how to deploy all the weapons that they have, I appreciate the clear thoughtfulness that has gone into it so far, and it has been cohesive. And again, I'll use that word one more time, detailed in ways that result in extra yardage on many of their basic plays, which are these, let's call them RPO family type of plays.
Yeah, and I think the RPO family stuff, there's a lot to unpack there. The RPO family stuff I thought was really interesting because, I'm always like, man, RPOs are a little bit messy. Personally, like when I watch them in college, when I watch them in the NFL, it's just like if the defense plays them right, you're really throwing the screen into a bad look, and that happens sometimes in the game. But what you're earning is like horizontal space in the defense, and so there's a couple times where they're not throwing those screens, but because of how often they've thrown them and because how effective they were early on, you're essentially holding like 4 coverage players over the screen over a 3-man surface. And so that player that's supposed to be fitting the run is no longer fitting the run, and it does lead to explosive plays. And so, when you go back and watch Cliff's stuff from 2021, that's the thing that shows up is how you've stretched the defense horizontally. And one of the things you talk about, like with outside zone, Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, like name your kind of offensive coordinator in vogue, like that's something that they're really excellent at, whether it's with the run game, whether it's formation, it's motion, and it looks a little bit different than Cliff. But I do think it was interesting to watch that, just a different way to skin a cat, you know what I mean? A different way to get to some of this space, which was great. And then, you mentioned the detail, and I've been really impressed, honestly, with the detail of the offense over, especially this game. Again, I expect this to be a metric that fluctuates up and down as the season goes, because I think that, this was a good game. They're going to have a regression game. Then they'll have another good game. It's a new offense. But I do think like some of the details in the run game, some of the details in formation, I think that trick play or the kind of pseudo throwback play to Austin Eckler, I thought that was beautifully executed. The timing was excellent. And that just shows a nice maturity in the offense. And I think it shows Cliff emphasizing stuff in the week in terms of time and preparation to maximize those opportunities. So I was really impressed with a lot of that as well. Again, that detail and that the spacing and all those things we just alluded to kind of wane when you get to the red zone. Obviously penalties influence that a little bit, but in the field again, and the other thing I thought, everyone's like, where's the explosive shots down the field? Again, some of the stuff we just described leads to explosive runs, leads to explosive kind of check down type plays. And those explosive opportunities, again, are what make offenses go. So it's a little bit unconventional, a little bit different than I think what I am used to in terms of watching, in terms of like quote unquote successful offenses. But the tenets and the principles are still there. And I think that's something I'm really encouraged by. And I think you got to give props to Jayden Daniels, because he really is the straw that stirs the drink, so to speak, because again, there was multiple 3rd and longs, 2nd and longs where he's able to scramble and again, keep this team in a manageable, either 4th and 1 or 3rd and short situation, or get the first down, which if you think about it, like we were talking about Daniel Jones in 2021 and how effective that offense was. And a big part of it was he was just stealing first downs. And I think we see that with Jayden right now.
For sure, yeah. We'll get to Jayden here in about 5 minutes, more specifically. But last piece of kind of the big offensive picture is the bad one for this week, which is the red zone. I'll offer one piece of simple analysis. Penalties are bad and they don't help you, especially when you are like, hey, it's 4th and 1 from the 3. If we can just lunge forward and get a first down, we have 4 shots from the 3-yard line. And there was one of those on a 4th down. I think there was another one on a 3rd and 1. And it's all pre-snap. There's one hold that Cosme had after the previous play, if you will. There was an offside, so offsides now it goes from like 3rd and 4 to 3rd and 9. Cosme has a hold on an incompletion. It's just decline. But every single pre-snap or every single penalty that got enforced in the red zone was a unforced error pre-snap penalty, and those are absolute killers. Beyond that, or if you want to expand on how that actually wound up affecting the play calling and the execution, Logan, certainly you can add more than penalties are bad that I just gave. But what ultimately is the thing or are the things that prevented them from scoring touchdowns on Sunday?
Yeah, I wish there was some type of deeper, philosophical football analysis here. But when you get a penalty on first down, you get a penalty on second down, and it's 2nd and 15 or 2nd and 20 or whatever it is, like, it's hard to get first downs. Like, analytically, it just increases the probability of not getting it substantially. And again, the other thing is I thought, they were very efficient running the ball in the field. And when they get down in the low red, I thought Cliff was, again, sticking with his identity. And this is not a criticism of Cliff, but the running efficiency declined on a couple of those. I'd say 3 out of the 7, he started with a run that went for like no gain after an explosive run. And then there was one sequence, I think you already described it, where Austin Eckler has a 5-yard run. He has a 4-yard run. They're in 3rd and 1. Someone jumps off sides. They're back at 3rd and I think 6 or 7, whatever it is. And then that's much harder to kind of complete that, right? So when the running efficiency was there, in the low red, they didn't capitalize on it. And then I felt like sometimes it put them in bad spots, honestly, like where they had a first down run after an explosive run, and it was like a gain of nothing. And then so you're in 2nd and 10, and again, that's hard to manage. And I think he did a good job calling his way out of it, but then the penalties, it just becomes hard to surmount that or overcome that. And I think that's something that, again, they'll probably look at. And that's the hard thing about the low red is the margin for error becomes really, really small. And having watched Jayden over the first 2 weeks, like one of the things I wanted to see was how he operated in the low red. And I think it feels like based on play call. And again, I have I've not talked to anybody about this. Is just pure speculation after watching the game. I think they want to make sure that Jayden is not leveraged a ton in those situations, because they're not asking him to do a ton. It's like, hey, here's a run, here's a screen here. And again, those screens look good, but the efficiency of those plays, which were excellent in the field, weren't quite as good in the red zone. And obviously that's going to lead to not scoring points.
Yeah, for sure. That hey, let's get a 4-yard screen. That's valuable in the field. It's like, hey, let's get to 2nd and 6. Sweet. Yeah. When you're at the 8-yard line, now you're just 2nd and 4 from the 4, and it's really hard to score from the 4-yard line.
And a lot of those weren't like the one to B-Rob's an incomplete pass. They had one to Zach Ertz that they set up that was really well spaced, and the timing was a little bit off, kind of in the low red. Like Zach's supposed to bump the rusher, doesn't bump him quite enough. It throws the timing off. Jayden could probably make the throw, but there's a guy right in his face. So there's 2 opportunities that end up in getting you to 2nd and 10 or a loss of yardage, because I think he took a sack on one of those, or he might have scrambled for a gain. But you know what I'm saying? Like, it just some of that efficiency wasn't there. And again, it's a little bit quicker. The defense changes. I think that's the other thing that's important to note too, is the Giants' philosophy shifts a little bit in those situations, and some of the stuff that works in the field isn't going to be quite as effective.
I would also say the quarterback run game is going to be really big for them in the red zone. Already has been this year. But you got to give credit to the Giants. Their ends are so freaking athletic that athletic. Burns and Thibodeau did a really great job of staying square, being able to play either option, if you will, on the zone read. And so they could kind of force a handoff and then go make the tackle, or they could force Jayden to keep it and then contain him, not let him get to the edge. And there's not going to be edges every week that can do that. Jayden's just going to be able to fake the handoff and go, or if he gives it, that edge is going to be out of the play, and you got numbers on the front side. So that is probably their number one weapon in the red zone, I would say, based off what we saw in camp and preseason and what we saw even in week 1. And that was, I don't want to say it wasn't available, but it was a much, much harder thing to use in week 2 against the Giants because of how athletic Burns and Thibodeau are. And there's a couple times down in the low red, like 2 or 3, where they ran zone read and those guys shut it down too. So that not only is it a loss of yards or no gain, so that you're in those bad down and distances, but one of your tools to overcome that is kind of off the table.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I do think that there is a, again, like there was a little bit of an execution issue there. I thought at times too, like there was one time where Jayden's doing the zone read, and they've got blockers out in front, and Kayvon Thibodeau's like kind of in between, and I'm like, man, just take that. I think you can outrun him to the edge. And then there was another time where they brought a nickel pressure away, so they're reading the right defensive end. They bring a nickel pressure to the offensive left. They're supposed to fan to it, the offensive line, so push to the blitzer. The Cornelius, you can see him trying to talk to Allegretti, get it communicated. They don't get it communicated. Thibodeau ends up hitting him right in the back, as he's trying to read that out. So again, there was some of that efficiency, which was in the field, just wasn't there in the red zone for whatever reason. I do think it's important to note, like having played in this stadium, not Northwest Stadium, but obviously when it was FedEx Field, that when you get in the bowl, even in a whole home game, like down in those end zones, it gets a little bit hard to communicate. And I think we saw a little bit of that, again, with some of the penalties, with some of the issues. So again, like with a young offense, those are details that come later. And so hopefully they get those things corrected and they look sharper going into next week.
So that brings us to Jayden Daniels' performance, Logan. And I think that there is obviously a ton to like. He has been clearly the best of the rookie quarterbacks so far, which I think is good perspective. If you look at the struggles that Caleb has had and the struggles that Bo Nix has had. But I do think that there's like some lines of delineation starting to form and some things that I'm starting to have questions about. And the questions, to be clear, are not, can he do this? Like it's how long till he can do this? And that's in the drop back game. And so I think a lot of the questions that folks have wind up are going to be answered as we discuss this and kind of parse this out, which is, some of the red zone issues. If you need to be able to drop back and read it out and it's really, really hard in the red zone, and your OC is like, I don't know if my guy's up to that, want to keep the leverage down, that can be part of the reason why that happens. Why are there not as many explosive plays as maybe we expected? There's zero throws down the field, 20 plus yards in the air in this game. He did have 9 in the intermediate, and he was 7 of 9 in the second half. So there is some really good stuff in that intermediate, but no big long throws down the field over the top. So what are you seeing when you watch? We'll add the rest of the offense back in the second, because there's obviously the playmaking and his job well done executing some of these box counts and things like that to make sure they're in the right plays. Like there's a lot of good stuff, but I know these are people's biggest questions. It's my biggest question of how is Jayden progressing in the drop back game, and I'm curious what you saw when you watched it.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's done a nice job this week, especially in the second half, of getting to some more of that stuff. He's a young player. He's coming along. I think the one thing, if I was going to, I just would like to talk to Cliff about this, is I felt like he was very. I think on the first drive, I don't think they called a true drop back at all. I think it was all screens.
I think
and
they only
RPOs.
called like 3 in the first half.
Right, and so that is good to insulate a player, obviously, but it also makes it hard to get them in a rhythm. And so that's something, again, like that I would never have even thought about. But, I'm calling plays at a high school now, and that's something that I lose sleep over, because it's like, I want you to be as comfortable as possible. I want to deleverage you as much as possible. But if I do that too much, then you never get in the flow and rhythm of a game. And so all of a sudden, when we got to have it and it's a little bit high leverage, it's third and long, and that's your first throw, like throw, like reading the defense out and feeling the rush, you're not going to look very good, because I haven't done a good job of integrating you. So again, I like what Cliff did, but again, he's a smart guy. I'd like to just say, like, how do you walk that line? And I'm sure he'd give me some, like, it's subjective, it depends, and that's a good answer. But that's kind of what I saw, is I felt like they never, like, in the first half, like there was a couple opportunities. I check my notes here in a second, but they run like a knife, what I call like a knife concept. So it's like a post on the left. There's a high cross by number 2 on the offensive right, and then a dig by number 1 on the offensive right. So some people would say dagger, but because of how the through is coming across, like he's in the progression, as opposed to dagger where he's not. And it's Luke McCaffrey, and it's like wide open. And either that is open or the dig is open. And the rush is a little bit in the face, right? It's tight, but I think if he just kind of takes a beat and throws the football, we're okay. But that's his first true like drop back of the game. And so again, like that's a little, you got to kind of my question is, does he have a feel at that point? Because obviously as the game went, he grew more confident, grew more comfortable, and had opportunities to make plays. So when I was watching Tampa Bay, I never felt like he got in that rhythm as a passer. So to me, you mentioned the 7 of 9 or whatever, the 7 completions in the second half. I thought that was really excellent to see, because he kind of had found his feet and understood what they were doing and was delivering really well-thrown footballs, obviously. So I think that's the one thing. And then in the first half, I think Cliff did a good job of calling some explosive shots down the field that the Giants, just through serendipity, kind of matched. Like one of my favorite concepts they ran was they were in a 3-receiver set to the offensive right. Zach was at number 3. He runs like a deep sit. They're playing quarters coverage. That backside quarters player looks like he's getting nosy on Zach. They run a really high post across the formation. And I don't know how the safety saw it, but he saw it and is able to kind of not take the cheese with Zach, bail underneath, and then the hook player's underneath Zach. So, like, again, they did call some stuff, but I think, again, in the first half, because there wasn't a high volume of it, I think there was maybe, like you said, maybe, I don't know, total, probably 5, like, true, like, shot, drop back type plays. And I think they did a good job matching it. And then, obviously, in the second half, we mentioned the success that they had already, so.
Yeah, I thought the sequence around the play where he gets knocked out for the play is really interesting to look at. So it's 8:16 to go in the second quarter. 1st and 10. That might have been the one you were just talking. Actually, no, I remember that play too, the one where McCaffrey screams open on that deeper cross. But on 1st and 10 on that sequence, he winds up, like, McCaffrey screams open on a crosser, and Jayden vacates a clean pocket. Winds up scrambling, and like there's a little bit of pressure, but not NFL real, like, hey, you got to go pressure. And if he just stands there and scans across the field and Luke is wide open, you're like, hey man, like we got 20 yards at least on this play. So instead, he vacates the pocket, winds up scrambling, takes a hit. Second down, they called that QB draw, which I kind of that was one play that I kind of hated. It's like, hey, your dude just got hit.
He checked to that. Jayden checked to that. So I think what he saw was, like, you have 2 backs in the backfield. It looked like they were in cover 2. They kind of rotate late after the check. And so there's an extra hat there. But if they kind of kept that cover 2 shell, I like the call, because then you're plus hats. So if you get it blocked up, you're running on a safety. So I do think that's, like, again, where, you know, youth of the quarterback is a little bit of an issue, right? You give them the power to kind of get you in the right look. You say, I want this play versus something very specific. It looks like that pre-snap,
right?
Changes post-snap, and, you know, it doesn't end up looking like a great play. But if it was executed in the look you wanted, you look like a genius. You know what I mean? So I think there was some of that going on there too.
Yeah, there's also just the situation though, right, where your quarterback just took a hit, and Cliff is probably not calling a play to get Jayden hit twice in a row. You know, it's kind of one of those.
Because he took a sack. It wasn't like a big hit, right? On 1st and 10, 2nd and 11, you're trying to get to a 3rd and manageable. Don't hate the call. And then 3rd and 13 is where he gets hit in the ribs, right? That's the one you're talking about,
right? Yeah. But it's the kind of thing where, like, the check comes up in a situation where that's probably not what Cliff. Obviously, it's not what Cliff called, because it was something that they checked to.
Right.
You know, it's like when, hey, quarterback just ran 40 yards. Let's just call a handoff. No checks here, because we don't want our guy to have to go back. Like, let's give him a snap to catch his breath kind of thing. But then the 3rd and 13 is interesting. And then the plays after, I think, is when kind of he starts to get into the rhythm as a passer. And I think Cliff starts to give him some of those easier looks that we're talking about. The 3rd and 13, I feel like we should talk about Logan. Like, to me, when Dan talks about Jayden the competitor, that's the embodiment. That's now the clip that you show. And not because he got hurt at the end, but it's like he has Eckler and Ertz as checkdowns, and neither of those guys are very likely to get the first down. The most likely option to actually convert on 3rd and 13 is Jayden running, and so he runs. And it sucks that he caught a helmet to wherever he got hit, the ribs, the gut, whatever it is that knocked the wind out of him. But it's tackle football, and sometimes that happens when guys run. But I think that it wasn't, I don't know, I don't think there was anything deeper down the field from what I saw. You can tell me if there's anything in the timing of the play that I missed. But he had Ertz, definitely could have thrown it. Had Eckler, definitely could have thrown it. Neither of those guys are probably getting more than 9 yards. It's 3rd and 13. So he says, let's party and let's go. And then from there, when he gets back in the game, they get into some of the quick game and things like that that we can talk about. But that 3rd and 13, like, that is why Jayden Daniels is going to be one of the reasons why Jayden Daniels is going to be a great player in this league is because he can turn a 3rd and 13 where there's not really anything there into a first down, and most quarterbacks can't turn 3rd and 13 into anything, anytime, anywhere.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes him special, and I agree with you. That's like a Skinner, like double post, high cross type of deal. So Terry's running a high cross. It's 3rd and 13, so the Giants are bailing out of there. They're standing right at the sticks. And this is why you draft him 2nd overall, or part of the reason why. And part of the reason why mobile quarterbacks are kind of becoming in vogue is because like that play is dead. You can check the ball down to Zach there, but I do think in terms of a person, and I think Zach had a great game, but I don't know if that's Zach's cup of tea, and catching a flat and then trying to get 10 yards and making a guy miss. Like, he's excellent at running routes and making contested catches and that stuff. Like, I think Jayden's better in space at this point. So, and to your point, I think you can see him be aware, right? He's running to the first down. He checks the sticks. He kind of does like a knifing, action to make sure he gets it. He does take a little bit of a shot, but that's so valuable to an offense, right? Think about if they have to punt there, right? Think about the field position game you're playing. And think about even if you got tackled short, you just flip the field by 10 yards just by doing that. So those plays are definitely going to, kind of accumulate and add up over the season. You've seen them add up in the Tampa Bay game. Like, the offense was almost non-functional. A little bit of that was Jayden's fault, but like it's on schedule, it's on time, it's on rhythm because of his ability to do that. So I just think like that's something that I think is excellent, and it's where it raises the floor of this offense tremendously. And we've talked about that a lot on this show already. So I love that play. I think it's a great play. I think there's other plays throughout the game that mimic that same thing, and obviously it's a double-edged sword because there's times where he thinks he can make a play, ends up taking a sack. Like, you're always going to be walking that line with him, as you are with most mobile quarterbacks, just because they always think they can make a play. But I think that is a great example of elevating the floor of the offense.
No doubt. So then after that, he misses a play, obviously. He comes back in, and they run on the offensive left, double slant. He hits Terry, first down. Then he misses Terry on a 2nd and 13 against man. His feet are a mess.
Yeah.
He winds up scrambling on a 1st and 15 later in the drive when the tight end screen gets blown up. But they start to get to some of the like drop back game, rhythmic, like let's get him going. That started the next drive. It looks like it's actually a true RPO. I wrote down RPO look because I just never know whether it's actually play action or because they do a really good job of executing. But it's the one where he drills Terry down the field, and then Allegretti for some reason is 7 yards downfield. Like
it's an RPO. Like that's. I was gonna say, like, if for those of you watching at home, if you want a keen trick to tell, the offensive line will tell you 9 out of 10 times they'll tell you because they're blocking a run. So does it look like a pass? Does it look like a keeper? And that's where the RPO stuff gets a little bit interesting, right? And usually you have a call in the RPO cadence that says, hey guys, like, you can get downfield, but let's be a little bit slow. And Allegretti, like, is running it like he's running outside zone, like he's sprinting. So it's like a pretty easy call because he's blocking the linebacker before the ball is even thrown, and he's like 4.5 yards down the field. So, but yeah, RPO, offensive line, I'll tell you. You
get some RPO downfield. They ran, I think it was a Hank concept. They get the curl to Terry. And then he, on 3rd and 8 on that opening sequence, he winds up rolling out and hitting Ertz on the play. But like that sequence of plays, starting with the quick game on the first play that he gets back in, that's when I think like Cliff started to unlock him and get him in a rhythm a little bit. And there are incompletions. He's got some messy footwork in some of those plays, but it felt like what you were talking about, Logan, at least to me, that he started to kind of feel the rhythm of the game. Might have taken a couple plays, but then we see his production from there, some more of those intermediate throws, some playmaking on the run, and his performance kind of takes off in conjunction with some more opportunities to be a drop back passer or to at least push the ball down the field.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, like that, to me, I mean, obviously, like the slant's nice, the Terry, the stick's nice, the Terry off the stick spacing concept. You mentioned the quick game, but to me, it's the throw to Zach where he really kind of gets in a little bit of rhythm. He gets a little pressure. They're bringing what appears to be a 6-man pro. They got 2 guys underneath and 3 guys deep, and he buys a little bit of time away from the unblocked rusher, really layers the throw nicely to Zach. The next play, they run that kind of fake screen takeoff to Zach, and that ball was just really well thrown and really well positioned. And then obviously there's that incompletion to Diami in the 3rd and 8 in the red zone where Brandon Coleman, who was up and down this game, gives up a pressure to Kayvon Thibodeau. There's a guy right in his face. He layers that ball right over top, and it's a little bit long, but he puts it kind of right where it needs to be. And again, I'm not saying Diame needs to do this, but it'd be cool if he could have caught that and just been a little bit more aware of where he was on the field. But I think those 3 throws just showed like an accuracy and anticipation that we've seen him have in practice. But like you said, it kind of gets him going in the rhythm of the game, which is nice to see because then he ends up making some big throws later also.
One question I did have on Jayden with the footwork, because it felt like it was super messy at times, but I'm also cognizant of something that you've said, and it's ringing in my head, which is you're not 100% on some of the timing of Cliff's offense in terms of the dropbacks and the footwork, and you're obviously super familiar with it in the West Coast stuff, and that's what I've watched most of my career covering the league. So, like, obviously there's that what was it, the miss to Terry where Terry kind of dives outside. He gets both hands on it, but it's a really difficult catch.
Right.
Like, clearly the footwork on the actual throw portion, that was off because he's like lunging into that throw. But there's some other dropbacks that feel a little rushed at times. Is that him being sped up? Is that actually what this offense looks like? Like, what's your feel on that with whatever you know about this offense at this point?
I don't know about all of them, but on that one to Terry specifically, that's just a simple stick. That's like in every offense in the NFL. And I think he did a really good job. You read the stick, it's dead. You get to over the ball, it's dead. So I like it. But then there's a little bit of a gap in the line. And that's where, again, like, this is something he's got to figure out for himself. Like, when can I be patient, and feel the rush, and when can I run? And so he, to me, is like, I'm to Terry, and for whatever reason, I think the gap kind of catches his eye, and he's like, I can run. But he's like, oh no, Terry's open. So he's like going to run, and then kind of like is off of a weird base and tries to throw it. So to me, I thought that was a really good example of like, hey man, like, great balance, great footwork in the pocket. Like, just finish the throw. You know what I mean? Like, throw the ball. And that is something I can't imagine how challenging that is for Cliff to negotiate. It's because, like, what makes you really good and makes you really dangerous is your ability to run. But I want you to be dangerous as a thrower too, which we saw more this game, which I appreciate. But like, these are the times where it's like you still see, like, I was trying to think of a way to quantify it. It's like you see kind of like you see an increase in efficiency, right, from the offense from him as a passer. But there's still these decisions where it's like, oh, that decision on the RPO could have been a little bit cleaner. The decision on the zone read could have been cleaner. That decision to stay in the pocket and throw the football could have been cleaner. That decision to throw the football away. And so I think as he continues to improve, some of that offensive efficiency we talked about in the red zone specifically will also augment too. So that's something that I'm excited about because, again, he improved a lot from week 1 to week 2, but there's still some of those things where you're like, we can just sharpen this up a little bit, and it's going to get sharper the more NFL defense you see.
Right. It's also going to fluctuate week to week. You know, the simplicity of the Giants defense probably helps compared to the complexity of Tampa's. Lou Anarumo, it's pretty freaking good as a defensive coordinator in Cincinnati.
Yeah.
They do some fun stuff. So that we'll see how that goes. But you know, then you got like Cleveland, like they're nasty. That's going to be really difficult to.
Yeah.
And what I like though is Cliff clearly understands that he has to insulate his rookie, not because his rookie's not really good, but it's because he's still a rookie. And I think that's the thing that I ultimately come out of this game with Jayden is going, man, there is so much to like. Yes, the floor of the offense is super high. When things break down, he can make stuff happen because he is a special athlete. Cliff understands, hey, I'm going to have to, you know, throw a lot of these screens because there is a leverage thing. But hey, maybe eventually I need to let him go a little bit to get into a rhythm. And it's there's not going to ever be a point where they figure it out and it clicks and he's going to be perfect every game because that's not how the NFL works. But seeing progress week over week, I think you have to be happy through 2 weeks of Jayden Daniels and really hopeful because I think a lot of the stuff that within the vacuum of the game didn't go well are distinct growth opportunities that I think we're excited to watch him grow with.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing I keep coming back to. It's like, you know, every test he's taken, he's improved, right? So last week to this week, first week to training camp, they're all kind of progressing. And so that's the thing that's encouraging to me, is if he was kind of staying the same as week 1 and, you know, kind of, and again, it's only 2 games, so I'm going to pump my brakes on that too. But if he kind of looked like Caleb Williams, where the mistakes aren't getting corrected, there's not kind of an improvement, I'd be a little bit nervous, quite honestly. So I think nervous is maybe the wrong word. I'd just be like, oh, we got to like kind of find a way to get him comfortable. And so I think, like you said, Cliff's done a good job of getting him comfortable. He seems to be improving week on week, which is important. Obviously, this week against Cincinnati is going to be its own ball of wax. So, head on a swivel there. But I'm generally encouraged. And I think there's like been this kind of crazy overreaction to him, like not being perfect all the time. And I think you hit the nail on the head there. Like, he's a rookie quarterback in a very complicated, and I think this is another thing that we haven't really talked about on this show, but it is 100% true. Like, offensive scoring's down, offensive touchdowns are down, offensive first downs are down. This is the year of the defense, and defenses are kind of starting to figure offenses out. So, like, I think if you look across the league and not just focus on the Commanders, you'll see that there's a pretty drastic difference between, like defense from 5 years ago and now in terms of how productive and effective they're being.
Which brings us to, Logan, the Commanders' defense. In the year of the defense, this is a game where there's a little something for everyone in terms of an argument to be made, I think.
Sure.
Ultimately, the Commanders give up 18 points. That's influenced, of course, heavily by the fact the Giants don't have a kicker. But they only gave up 3 scoring drives. They forced some punts. They get a turnover for the first time all season, but they also give up 6 yards per play. They give up, I think it was 7.7 a carry, or wound up being 5.9, but it was 7.7 for a long time in this game to Devin Singletary. There is definite issues. They also were able to figure some things out late in this game to make enough adjustments to win. So that's good. Where do you want to start with the defensive performance from the Giants game?
I guess we'll start with the defensive line, just kind of talk through the observations there. And again, we'll, I guess, go through the levels. We'll go defensive line, linebacker, secondary. And so I think a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, they're rushing for so many yards. And I understand that criticism. But I think when you look at John and Duron, like, one of the things, like, they're excellent football players, but they're not the best in the league at defeating double teams, right? And so one of the things that you saw in this game was you saw Joe Wood Jr. come out with a little bit more conservative coverage structure. And as the game went on, they leaned into that more because I think they were worried about some of the man-to-man opportunities, and obviously rightfully so. Like we saw what Malik Neighbors was able to do to them in certain situations. When you're in that soft coverage structure, right? And this is true. So, like, basically, the first play of the game, the Giants come out in 12 personnel. They have 2 tight ends to the right. They have that kind of guy on the ball, guy on the wing. And you see Daniel Jones just start tapping his helmet. It's because Washington's in a cover 2. That means they have as many defensive players as there are blockers. So if you're an offensive player, you say, this is great. The person that is unblocked, that has to make the tackle on the back, is standing 12 yards away from the runner. So we're going to be able to sink these double teams, drive them off the ball. And if you can see the linebackers, they're a little bit tentative. You can tell they were thinking a little bit about, I think, Daniel Jones' running ability. They didn't want to get hurt in the pass game. And when you can sink double teams on guys and really drive off, like, you're going to have a hard time stopping runs. And so I think that was one thing. But I thought it felt to me like a conscious decision. It's like, we're going to give up some in the run game to make sure that we're locked in the pass game, especially as the game went on. And so as they sink those double teams, that's pretty hard. Like on a duo, for example, right? Like that's a tough sell. I think the other thing is early in the game, like through the first half, Brian Daboll was like, we're not letting this defensive line eat us alive. So if they're not in a play pass look with the 2 tight ends, they're leaving a tight end in pro. They're leaving the back to help him. You're getting double teams on the 2 interior players. It's all quick game stuff. Those opportunities, it becomes much more challenging to affect the game as a rusher. And so that's an example to me of a guy in Brian Daboll calling a game knowing, hey, like, I want Daniel Jones to be comfortable. I want our offensive line to be comfortable. And when you juxtapose that to Tampa Bay, which I went back and watched all those rushes, they were much more aggressive in the pass game. And as a result, our defensive line had much more one-on-one opportunities, much more kind of third and obvious pass rush situations, second and long situations. That wasn't quite as available here. And again, with the mobility of Daniel Jones, you could tell there was a little bit more conservatism to the rush and the rush philosophy. So I don't know if I touched on all the points there, but I think that's kind of what you're seeing from that group. And I think it's a stylistic thing more than anything, that depending on the week, can be augmented.
Yeah, that makes sense to an extent. The one thing that I don't know, for me when I watch it seems like a defense that hasn't played together very much.
Sure.
And so some of that stylistically might be true, and I have no doubt that it is. And those, hey, you're gonna beat us with the run. Okay, well now we're giving up 5 yards carry, and that kind of sucks. But that 5 yards might be because you get a 15-yarder, and then if we can get a 2 and a 3-yarder, now you're in 3rd and 5, and if we can get a stop and one pass breakup, then we're set. We got you off the field. Cool. But if we give up a 30-yarder to Malik Neighbors, now you're in field goal range if you had a kicker. So I get that that calculation. But when I say it's guys that don't look like they've played together, I think sometimes they're making some of that stuff worse, because there's times where, like, say Payne will jump inside, and then Luvu's the linebacker that's supposed to fit behind him, and he jumps outside. And so now this gap that Jeremy Chin is having to fill that should be 4 yards wide or 2 yards wide is 8 yards wide, and that's impossible for Jeremy Chin. And so to me, there's got to be, like, even if you're going to make some of these choices that I understand when you phrase it that way, for sure, and why they may take these calculated risks, to me, they've got to still play together better, if that makes sense. And I wonder how much of that is something that can be coached up through, whether it's, hey, if this, then that, or you guys better talk, or is it just something that comes with reps of Luvu watches Payne more in front of him and he sees something happen and he's got a better, file bank and can adjust off of him more appropriately to limit some of these gaps and prevent some of these explosive runs, because it's, yes, you don't want to give up explosive passes, but giving up explosive runs as the alternative is not exactly what the game plan calls for.
Yeah, so I think that's a really interesting example that you brought up, because to me that's more like getting used to the scheme, because I think that is a run blitz. I think I don't know. I have to talk to Joe Wood Jr., but just how quickly Luvu hits it, I think that's what's going on. And so what I would assume is, like, obviously as an offensive lineman, you're trying to create horizontal movement, horizontal displacement, and so when the defensive lineman is stunting, that can be a positive for the offensive line, because I can just carry you the direction you want to go. So learning, hey, like, I'm stunting to the B gap or the A gap, whatever John Allen's doing on that play. But when I feel that pressure, I have to fight back, right? I have to fight back to stop that. And then if I'm Frankie Luvu, I have to hit that a little bit tighter to kind of make sure that run lane's condensed for Jeremy Chin, because you're right, that thing's huge. But they're both kind of trying to avoid the offensive player. And I think, like, if you're doing that to rush the passer, that's one thing. But if you're doing it to stop the run, it's a little bit different. And I think, that was something they didn't do a ton of last year. As a defense, they didn't bring a lot of movement. And that was a criticism I had, because I do think you can maximize those guys through movement. But I do think you got to get used to the issues that come with moving pre-snap. And I think that's a really good illustration of that, at least to my eye. Like, hey, when I'm moving, if I don't get the penetration, I need to stop and set this gap down to make sure that we're not expanding holes and expanding run lanes. So I think that's, again, like I said, really good example of an issue that comes with learning a new defense, right? And you see that all the time in the front, and you see it in the secondary too, and just kind of learning new techniques and learning new positions, like not new positions, but new like hand positions, new feet positions. How do I defeat this? Because I'm not used to having this blocker on my shoulder as opposed to head up kind of stuff. So.
Yeah, and I think the same concept applies to them just completely taking themselves out of place. I remember there's one lead play where John just literally runs past the fullback. Like, he's got an escort of the left guard right past the fullback and the halfback as they run by him into the hole that he has vacated. And you're just like, I don't know what the correct solution is here, because I don't know what the coaching point is. And, like, obviously he's trying to be aggressive.
Do you have the play number? I think that was a Fox 2 draw. Do you have the play number by any chance?
I don't. I don't have a quarter. I don't have anything. I just have a picture in my head of him completely running by the back. And my reaction was not like, hey, John Allen sucks, which I think is a lot of people right now are like, hey, they're giving up these explosive runs. These guys aren't that good, whatever. I'm like, what is happening here? What is the coaching point where this doesn't happen as dramatically in the future? because obviously this shouldn't happen. This makes it harder for everyone else. It takes John out of the play, but I don't know exactly what the issue is here that's underlying, or that is the underlying cause.
Yeah, I don't remember that exact play off the top of my head, but I think I remember it from the broadcast. And so that to me is like it's like Fox 2 draw. And so I think he is getting a draw look. I would assume that's how people usually run that play. And obviously, like when you think pass, you get a little bit more creative. You take inside moves, you take outside moves. And that's why you're calling that play offensively, is to kind of put you in a little bit of a conflict and create natural movement, right? To get you to move as opposed to me moving you. And so I think that's one of the things, again, I don't know if that was a scouted look. I don't remember the Giants running that against Minnesota. So one of the things that I think is consistent is versus kind of these novel looks, right? The trap wham week 1, the Fox 2 draw week 2, is the reaction is what the offense is anticipating, as opposed to you being able to sniff it out. And I think that's where that gets a little bit challenging. And again, they get paid a lot of money. They need to make some plays, obviously. But just to kind of provide some context, that is hard. Like when there's an unscouted run look, it can be really challenging. And you got to say, go make a play. If I'm the coach, like, go make a play. Like, that's why you're here. But I understand that I understand what you're reading, which is the guard, and I understand that the guard is giving you kind of this pseudo pass set, and I understand why you're rushing the passer and kind of vacating some gap responsibility.
Yeah, I think that's the hard part. The more definitive thing that I feel comfortable saying at this point with Allen and Payne is those guys. I hate using the money thing, but the money thing is actually, like, if you think of it as a responsibility versus like actual dollars and cents, it's like, hey, we're paying you a lot of money because you're awesome at football, and we're going to build a defense and a philosophy around the fact that you guys are great. Part of the reason they probably didn't invest a little bit more or try to in edge is because they're like, look, we need really solid edges to support these interior guys because they can rush the passer. They can do things other interior guys can't. And in this game, they combined for 2 tackles. John had 2, Duran had 0. Duran did have a really nice pressure that ultimately led to Cleveland Ferrell's sack, so it's not like there's 0 production coming out of them. I'm not going to overstate it, but I do think at the end of the day, Logan, there's all these different things we can talk about, the caveats, the this, the that. When I say they, it's not a John Duran without help from anybody else, but the ecosystem of the Commanders defense needs to create a way for those guys to be far more productive if they want to be better. And that's kind of my question as we head into the Cincy game that we'll talk about more and how they match up with Cincy, obviously on the late week preview pod. But how do you get to a place where John Allen and Duran Payne are making plays? And that right now there's a lot more plays being made right by them in terms of explosive runs and some of the things that we've seen through 2 weeks versus, because I do feel like a lot of those explosive runs were up the middle.
Sure.
And we talked about why, but how do we get to a point where that's not happening is ultimately the question that Joe Witt Jr. and Dan Quinn have to solve.
Yeah, and I think it's defense is hard, man, because offenses right now are pretty innovative, and obviously we've talked about the offensive resurgence or the defensive resurgence, and one of the things you see guys that are playing a lot of man coverage, being super aggressive with their pressures, and I don't know right now, depending on personnel, like how comfortable they feel with that. And again, I think guys are playing good in the back end. St. Juice, I think, did a good job. I think Quan flashes a little bit. But, like, for example, I just found that play you were talking about. Like, they're in nickel, right? So you got Mike Sanders still kind of as your extra linebacker. Think about that. You've got 21 personnel in the field. You've got 40 linemen. You've got 2 linebackers. And you've got a nickel player in as your extra linebacker. So you're short hats, and you've got a guy who's more of a pass player in also. And I understand why you're doing it. They're in 12 personnel, usually match nickel now with to 12. So good job kind of finding a matchup, because like when you look at it, John is penetrating up the field, right? He's being aggressive up the field. They want him to be a penetrating team. It kind of looks like pass, like you're talking about. He's on his hip, kind of widens out. But if the nickel is really aggressive downhill and he's taking on an offensive lineman, obviously that's a mismatch. Mike Sanders is not a big guy. Like, that's a different result, right? If you've got like a run stopping linebacker in there, like let's say, for example, like Frankie Louva's there, he sees that, like that's what he does, right? He's going to attack downhill. He's going to condense that run lane, and it's going to be a no gain. Now, John could for sure be better, but I do think like this is kind of where, like in the same way we're giving the offense some grace for some play calls and some, kind of bringing Jayden along and all that kind of stuff. I think there's some of that going on here with the defense as well. Like, what are we good at? Who do we want to be? What are the guys good at? Because it's going to be different. I've said this on every show that I've done since the season started is I'm telling you, every team I've been on, we think we're one thing at the start of the season, and we end up being something totally different by week 4. Like it's how it goes, even with teams that are pretty established, because you're like, man, we're not as good as this as I thought, but we're really good at this other thing. And so I think Joe Witt Jr., that's the responsibility of him and his staff to kind of say, hey, we want these guys to be penetrators, but people are taking advantage of it. So maybe we got to dial that back a little bit and say, hey, man, when it's second and long, let's be more penetrating. And maybe we can get into some different nickel personnel to maximize these types of looks. So I think that's something just to keep an eye on moving forward. And I think the other important thing to remember is it wasn't pretty, but they freaking won the game. And so now they can make these corrections and be in a much better spot. So, yeah, do they need to be better? 100%. But every team in the NFL has that thought every single week. Like every team, even bad teams I was on. When I was in 16 with the Bears, we were a bad football team. But every week it was like, how do we get better? When I was in Atlanta, a great football team. How do we get better? And so I think like that's the thing I'm motivated by or encouraged by with this staff is like they are a staff that acutely understands that. And Dan in his comments makes that very clear each and every week. So they will get better. It's just about how they do that.
100%. And I think that you see that willingness to change, adapt, try things, compete in how they change their coverage structures in this game. We talked about this on the post-game show, but they very clearly, based off their first 2 games, would love nothing more than to be a man-to-man team on third down, dial up some pressures, and then they realize we don't have the men to do the man-to-man thing, especially with Forbes out. With Forbes in there were issues, obviously, as well. But between Michael Davis and Noah Igbenogany trying to guard Malik Neighbors, didn't go great. And eventually they were like, okay, well, let's stop trying to do that. And I think that's great to understand, like, okay, let's make Daniel Jones read out some cover 2s and find the gaps and make other guys beat us. Let's make sure these aren't easy throws to Neighbors. Let's make sure he can't just run 15 yards. And hey, good job. We stayed on top of him. Okay, he stopped. And like Benjamin St. Juste gives up a couple of those, and it's exactly what he's supposed to do. Right. Don't get beat deep. And on one, they run, it's like an 18-yard gain. Very next play, Neighbors runs a double move, and BSJ stays on top of it. And I'm like, that's proof that he did the right thing on the play before, even though he gave up 18 yards. But eventually you have to go, we don't want to give up 18 yards. And so they switched. They went to more 2-high structures. They played a lot of 2. They had defenders underneath those throws. And that's good stuff from Joe Witt Jr. To make that adjustment in game. I think, one, I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about kind of those decisions and what you saw with that. But also, is this just a reality that they're going to have to move forward with, that they're going to have to change what they do because and try to win more schematically because they perhaps do not have the horses to just say, we're going to line up and beat you and we can be creative and exotic and dial up these pressures and do the things that clearly they would love to do in more ideal circumstances.
Yeah, I think much like we were talking about the offense and just being detailed, I think you want to see an improvement in the details. Like on the touchdown to Malik Neighbors, like they're in a bunch. They run like a little crossing thing, right? Obviously Bobby Wagner's the hook player. It looks like Daniel Jones is going to scramble. He steps up and they mess up the pass, right? It looks like Jeremy Chin should take the crosser. Doesn't really work out that way. So let's detail that stuff up, right? And again, like the scheme, I don't think there's anything fundamentally wrong with the scheme at the moment. It's just about like, why can we not get, again, this communicated? And it's a lot of new people working together. So that's one thing I'd say is like, how much better can we get detail? We already talked about on that run stunt where Jeremy Chin's left out to dry because it's like, like a running lane bigger than this room and he's got to make a tackle. Like that's tough duty. But can we help him out? When we feel that pressure, can we sit down on that? Can we be a little bit tighter with the stunt? So that's where I think like, I've said this again everywhere. I say it to you almost every week. Like it takes three years to learn an offense or defense. It's the details that really make it come together and what we're talking about. So that's what I'd like to see. And I do think that they can do some stuff. I think when you look at week 1, like they had a 66.5% pressure rate. Like, think about that. Like, that's pretty incredible, for a bunch of guys that are like relatively no-named up front. So if you can get this cleaned up a little bit in the back end, like they've got something in the bag for this, right? They've got the ability to create pressure. They've shown that already this year. So it's just about How do we manage first and second down? How to become a little bit more efficient? What are our details in man coverage? Because as much as like they're a little understaffed in the back end, it's not going to matter. If you can create pressure with that frequency, like that's incredible. That's over 50% of the time. Like if you're doing that, you're doing backflips. Like we weren't even close. I think last year, the highest pressure rate we had all year was 33%. Like, come on. So to be double that is incredible in week one. So they have it. It's just about, can we detail this sucker up a little bit? And again, find what we feel most comfortable with defensively.
Yeah. I guess my question would be, though, you don't have, like, you do have, 3 years to learn if you're Mike Sainer still. You don't have that because you have a game on Monday night, and then you have another game on the next Sunday, and another game. So how do you walk the line between coaching up the details and adding the things you want back in, while also I'll use the word coping with the reality that the calendar waits for no one.
Yeah, the calendar waits for no one, and I think that's part of it. It's like when you look at I don't know, Kansas City is a great example. Like when they play their coverages, like everyone knows what the heck's going on. That's been like pretty much the same group for the last couple of years. Like they've done a really nice job. That's to get to the best version of yourself is the 3-year window. Every week though, you got to get better, right? So I'm not absolving them of anything. Like we got to get the bunch thing fixed. We got to get the penetrator double team thing fixed up front. Like we got to get that stuff fixed. And that's what this week is for. And if everybody is diligent and studious and approaches it with a competitive professional mindset, it'll be better. Will it be perfect? Probably not. I will say when I watch Cincinnati, I'm like, they struggle running the football and they don't do a lot of crazy stuff offensively. They're kind of like Joe Burrow, go make us right. Maybe they're going to be in more bunches now. I would assume probably so because we've had a hard time with it. But you know what I'm saying? Like this will be a different challenge. But my point is like they will get better. It's just about the rate at which they do get better and how they get everybody working together the most quickly to handle some of the stuff that they're expecting to see, I guess is my point.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Anything else, any part of this game that we want to tack on to the end here?
Yeah, just real quick, I thought Bobby Wagner played his absolute face-off. Like he just shows why he's such a nice add in the middle of the defense in terms of some of the tackles that he made in the run. Frankie Louvu's just a Tasmanian devil out there. Obviously, we talked about some corrections that may or may not need to be made for him, but really, I enjoy watching him play football. Benjamin St. Juste, I thought, did a great job. Like, I know people are like, oh, he gave up a couple, but like he is just playing in with more confidence that I think I'm really encouraged by that. To kind of have, again, maybe not the best corner in the NFL, but a guy you can trust out there is extremely valuable. And now it's kind of about fleshing out the rest of that secondary group and making sure that guys are on the same page and trusting each other. And again, hopefully that happens sooner rather than later.
Yeah, for sure. Louvu and Wagner had a couple of hits in this game that I was like, let me rewind that and watch it. So you can talk about the play style that Dan Quinn wants showing up a little bit more in week 2 than week 1. I think you definitely saw some of the physicality and the speed, and hopefully that will continue to get better as we go throughout the season. Okay, next up for us, usual schedule for the rest of the week, even though there's Monday Night Football. We'll have a preview pod for you on Thursday. And then next week, we'll see how quickly we can get through the film or whether we do just an instant reaction on Tuesday and then a Wednesday film review. We'll figure it out. But we'll get you all the things that you're used to and get back on schedule in time to preview week 4 by the end of next week. We're also going to bring back Take 5, so you get little bonus episodes with some fun stories and all that kind of stuff coming into your feed. So make sure you're subscribed wherever you are watching or listening right now. For Logan, I'm Craig. We'll see you next time on Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.